La Maternity, Paris, the morning of the 4th of November, 1849. A young woman bends over a crib, rinsing an infant's infected eyes with a syringe of warm water. A thread of the fluid arcs up and touches her own left eye. She blinks, wipes it, finishes the round, and writes down the time. She is 28. By tomorrow, she will not be able to open that eye. Within weeks, she will lose it. She had crossed an ocean and broken into a profession that did not want her to learn to operate. A surgeon needs both eyes. This is her case file. To understand what she lost that morning, you have to understand what she had already taken. In 1849, no medical school in the United States had granted a degree to a woman, and none intended to. The profession was not closed by a law you could point to and repeal. It was closed the way a door is held shut from the inside, by custom, by a show of hands at a faculty meeting, by the settled conviction that the inside of the human body was not a thing a woman should be permitted to see. Elizabeth Blackwell had spent 2 years getting her eye to that keyhole. She had been turned away by school after school, let in at last almost by accident, and had taken her degree at the head of a class that crossed the street to avoid her. She held the degree. What she did not hold was a place to use it. American hospitals would not employ her, and the surgical training she was after, no school in the country would give a woman. So she went abroad to find it. The syringe was the closest she had been allowed to get to a surgeon's work. She was born in Bristol, England, in 1821, into a family of dissenters who refused the established church, and were refused its schools in return. So her father hired private tutors and had his daughters taught the same subjects as his sons, a thing that was, in 1820s England, close to a provocation. The house ran on conviction. It was a stop on the abolitionist circuit. Women's rights were argued at the table. The children were raised to treat an unpopular position as a reason to hold it, not abandon it. The family emigrated to the United States when Elizabeth was 11. Her father died when she was 17, leaving them poor, and she went out to teach. In New York, in Kentucky, in the Carolinas. In Kentucky, she resigned over the slavery she saw around her and walked away from the wage rather than keep the post. Medicine did not begin as an ambition. It began at a bedside. A friend named Mary Donaldson was dying slowly of a cancer she found too shameful to have examined by male physicians. She told Elizabeth that a woman doctor would have spared her the worst of it, and that Elizabeth, of all the women she knew, had the mind and the nerve to become one. It was not a welcome idea. Her mind ran to history and metaphysics. The body and its failures she found distasteful, and she said so without apology. As a schoolgirl, she had once been shown the eye of a bullock, lifted from its cushion of fat to demonstrate the structure of sight, and she had not forgotten it. So the suggestion arrived in a person with no love of medicine at all. She took it the way you take a splinter you cannot reach. It stayed, and it worked inward. The more she examined the plan, the better it served a second purpose, she rarely said aloud. A medical degree would stand between her and marriage, like a wall, and she wanted the wall. She decided to do it. But that path did not yet exist. In the 1840s, American medical training ran through a scatter of small private colleges, most of them hungry for fees and indifferent to standards, and uniformly shut to women. She prepared the only way left to her, boarding in the houses of physicians who would have her, reading their books after the lamps were lit, sitting examinations she had taught herself to pass. One of them, a respected Philadelphia physician named Joseph Warrington, thought her plan impossible and told her so, and wrote her a letter of recommendation anyway. Then she applied and was refused by one school after another. When her application reached Geneva Medical College in rural New York, The dean did not want her either. But it carried Warrington's name, and he would not insult a physician of that standing by refusing outright. He passed the decision to his all-male students, certain they would do the refusing for him. They thought the whole thing a joke and voted, every one of them, to let her in. No one expected her to come. She came. Her professors found her an inconvenience. James Webster, the anatomy lecturer and one of her few champions on the faculty, asked her to absent herself when the reproductive organs were demonstrated, judging the subject improper for a woman to see. She refused. She asked, plainly, to be taught no differently from the men beside her, and the students who had let her in as a joke now sided with her. She stayed. What the room cost her she kept to her diary. It was not the anatomy that tested her, but the absurdity of being watched while she studied it. To keep her face still, she pinched her own hand until it nearly bled. The town around the college treated her as a curiosity or a scandal. People stopped on the street to look at her as they would at a strange animal. Geneva had decided she was either immoral or insane, and she gave it no help deciding. Between terms, she spent a summer at the Blockley Almshouse in Philadelphia, on the wards where the city sent its poor to recover or die. She treated typhus there and made it the subject of her graduating thesis. On the 23rd of January, 1849, she took her diploma and told the man who handed it to her that it would be the work of her life to bring it honor. She had finished first in her class. She was the first woman in the United States to hold a medical degree. The dean, who shook her hand, had already made his feelings public. He hoped no other woman would follow her through his doors. The exception had been admitted. The rule was to remain the rule. A degree, it turned out, was not the same as a door. She wanted to cut, and cutting was the one thing the American profession would not teach a woman. The training lay across the Atlantic, so she went after it, and found Paris no more willing than Philadelphia. It would not register her as a physician. It would let her stand in a maternity ward as a student midwife. She took what the door allowed. And so, on the 4th of November, she was bent over a crib with a syringe of warm water, washing an infant's eyes. The disease in that child was purulent ophthalmia, a violent contagious inflammation that drowns the eye in discharge. A thread of it reached her own. Within days, the infection had crossed from the patient's eye to the physician's. The sight went first, the pain stayed longer. To stop it spreading inward, the surgeons took the eye out. The other recovered, but never fully cleared. A surgeon works with two eyes, and she now had one. The single thing she had crossed an ocean to win was gone. Taken not by the men who had barred the door, but by a sick child she had bent down to help. Two failures met over that crib, and only one of them was visible to anyone in the room. The first had shaped her whole life, a profession that shut women out, not on evidence, but on conviction. No study had ever found that women made poor physicians because no school would admit one long enough to gather the data. The case against her had never been examined, only asserted. Anatomy was indecent for a woman's eyes. No patient would trust her. A woman with a scalpel was simply unthinkable. She had spent her career arguing with a verdict reached without a trial. The second failure no one in that building could have seen, because the thing that caused it was too small to see. Purulent ophthalmia spreads by direct contact with infected matter, but in 1849, no one understood how sickness moved from one body to another. Germ theory, the idea that specific invisible organisms cause specific diseases, was still a generation from being believed. Joseph Lister would not carry antisepsis into surgery until 1867. So there was no barrier between a clinician's hands and a patient's infection, because the profession did not yet know a barrier was needed. The standard treatment for a streaming eye was to flush it, and the person doing the flushing was thought to be in no danger at all. Blackwell washed an infected eye with the best practice of her moment, and the best practice of her moment had no idea that infection could move. Neither blindness was rare. Women were shut out of medicine across the Western world, and surgeons everywhere worked with bare, unwashed hands, losing patients to fevers they could name only after the patient was dead. What was rare was the geometry of that morning. Both failures meeting in one person, in one eye, at one bedside. The empty place where germ theory should have been is the same blankness that let the profession keep deciding by custom, and it is what cost Elizabeth Blackwell her eye. She was maimed by the precise state of the science she had just been licensed to practice, blinded in part by the very condition that had kept the door shut, a profession that could not yet see what was in front of it. The operating theatre was closed to her for good. She came back to New York in 1851 with a degree no hospital would honor, and met the city the way she had met Geneva. Refused a post, refused consulting rooms, refused even the lease on a place to see patients. She later called it a blank wall of social and professional antagonism. She had wanted a wall once to keep marriage out. Now there was a different wall, and she did the only thing the record ever shows her doing with a wall. She built a door into it. She was no longer the only one. A handful of women had since forced their way into medicine through the same small side doors she had. Her own younger sister Emily among them, the third woman in the country to take a degree, and Marie Zakrzewska, a Polish-born physician whom Elizabeth herself had helped get into the school that trained her. In 1853, she opened a one-room dispensary for poor women. In 1857, the three of them turned it into the New York Infirmary for Indigent Women and Children, a hospital staffed by women no one else would hire, for patients no one else would see. In 1859, her name became the first a woman's had ever been on the United Kingdom's medical register. In 1868, she opened a medical college for women beside the infirmary, and built into it the things that had been missing from her own training. 4 years of study, where the men's schools asked for 2, an entrance examination, and a final board that could not be flattered into passing anyone, because the examiners who set it taught none of the students they judged. No one was ever held to account for keeping her out, because keeping her out had broken no law. It had only been the custom of the time. The custom never apologized. It simply, slowly, moved aside. Once she had proved there had never been anything behind the wall except the wall. She never married. None of the 5 Blackwell sisters did. In 1856, she had taken in a daughter instead, Kitty Barry, a 7-year-old Irish orphan, who stayed at her side for the next 54 years. She spent her last decades in England, taught at a new medical school for women in London, and grew old in a house above the sea at Hastings. She died there on the 31st of May, 1910. She crossed an ocean to learn to use a knife, and lost the eye that would have guided it before she ever made a cut. So the surgeon she never became spent her life opening the door that had been shut against her, and thousands of women walked through it after her. One question for the comments. If the profession had simply let her in, would her name still be remembered? The next case on this channel, the year an Edinburgh anatomy school ran out of corpses, and 2 men found a way to keep it supplied. This is the sealed ward.